And we are live, and this is the Bunderdome, and I am your host, Timothy Lim. Joining me, as always, is my co-creator and co-host, Mark Pellegrini, and we are excited to have with us tonight our friend and the writer of Soul Finder Demons Match, Douglas Ernst. And the description for and link to his channel is in the description for this particular episode. Tonight, our topic of conversation is it's kind of a celebratory stream. We called it Amateur Hour because one of the things that we discuss is there's these kind of benchmarks that occur when you have your own comic coming out. Things that things that you'll kind of remember for the rest of your life because of how impactful they are. And there's a nervousness associated with them. And until you actually, there's a couple of milestones when you see that cover for the first time, when you see the first page for the first time, when you see the completed book, when you see it in print. But it's kind of like you have to wait until the fat lady sings. And I think for Doug, it was actually seeing it in the hands of someone who was a reader or a customer. And that happened not only this weekend, but today, apparently in droves, people were getting both Soul Finder Demons Match and Black Ops Hair Trigger. And we want to thank a lot of people for posting those pictures. They make us happy. We want to thank all of our backers. We want to thank the people who supported both of our books. We know that that is money that you invested in us, and we hope that we can deliver. And we coronate and we congratulate Doug Ernst because this is his first book. Even though we consider ourselves amateurs, I am very happy to announce that Doug got his book out on time, as promised, and that fulfillment will continue. So thank you for joining us tonight, Doug.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but thanks for all the help that you put into it. Logistically, I could not have done it without you, for sure, and obviously Mark for reading the first draft of Soul Finder and all of the input that you guys gave in terms of refining the script.
Well, I was very happy to read it. I mean, you've read my scripts in the past, Doug, but I was really excited to read your writing. And it was a really solid script, and I only did a little bit of suggestions on it, so I didn't have too much to do with Soul Finder. I'm looking forward to getting my copy in the mail. I can't wait to read it. But, yeah, like Tim was saying, we've all got our books out, and all three of us have day jobs. How do we do it?
Yeah, that's the question and we were talking a little bit before the stream that interestingly enough, we've been getting a lot of comments in our private messages. A lot of people either don't pay attention to the delivery date or they're so used to late campaigns that we have been getting a lot of cordial messages where people were pleasantly surprised. I know he's probably going to listen in the chat at some point, but the Comic Book Hut, that guy is very critical of people, but God bless him because someone needs to do that. Someone needs to hold folks accountable. And he posted a very quick unboxing review where he was like, I can't believe that this book is here already. Like that was a record 3 months. And in the case of Soul Finder, which he should be getting, I think this week, 4 months, which are very close together. So, people have been asking how we did it. Mark and I have obviously talked about it at length. We have our own system of doing it. But for people who don't know, Doug, what was your mentality going into this? Because there is a lot of like strategizing that has to occur before you start working on this. And even though you're able to fulfill in 4 months, I mean, we're talking about almost a year to a year and a half of pre-planning to get your game together. So yeah. Now's the time to kind of, I know you're probably going to do it on your own channel, but now that we're here, walk us through it because obviously you gave this a lot of thought to get to where we are today.
Yeah, well, going way back to our earliest conversations when we talked about doing the book together, and even going back to, I want to say late June, early July, I did a video regarding this independent comics movement. And I said, the next big thing is going to be fulfillment for people, getting those books out on time. Because if you cannot, if you're new, if you're a first timer like myself, you're making your first impression to people. And if they get a book that's falling apart in their hands, if it's months and months and months and months late, and you're not giving them updates and all this, they're not going to come back to you. And so one of the things that I stressed, and obviously you were on board with, was we set the expectations. So I would like to get a certain percentage of the book done, so that way we know that even in a worst case scenario, we're essentially going to be on time. And so it was just basically planned for the apocalypse in terms of shipping, something weird happening. And that way we should be able to get the book out on time.
Yeah, and I think I have you to thank for a lot of our pre-planning for the previous campaigns that we worked on, because you have been cataloging kind of the milestones that people should expect along the way. And one thing that you talked about was, yes, it's great if you can have any type of movement, whether that be you know, a culture war type movement, or just anything involving independent comics. And the accountability, a lot of it will rest in terms of, can you deliver on time and can you fulfill? So a lot of it is answering these questions of logistics. And because of questions like that, questions that people like you and other independent YouTubers have brought up, that got us thinking in terms of what do we need in terms of our campaign as well. And one thing that happened with us, because on our first campaign for Trump Space Force, we were late by approximately 1 month. We said November, and we shipped the first book was shipped out on December the 23rd. Actually, no, it was the 21st, and I can confirm that the first person to receive it was actually Captain Cummings. He received it on Christmas Eve, and then people were getting their books by December the 26th, so we were late by a month. And even then, my mistake, my fault was that one, I had put trust in a certain subsidiary company that I had not vetted before, even though they could guarantee me a certain time on delivery. And in the end, it was a talk between Brett Smith and I that made it so that we decided we have to mail the books out. They've been waiting in a warehouse for a month. We have to get as close to that time as possible. So I think your early cataloging of the milestones that you have to hit for successful comic campaigns was very beneficial in terms of how we planned what we did as well. And then Mark, obviously, even though he likes to shrug it off in terms of like, well, I'm just a writer and then my work is done. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth in terms of him helping me with like pricing. That was like a big thing in terms of like, hey, what do you think of this price point? Is it too low, too high? Should we offer more? Should we offer less? So a lot of the questions that people might have about crowdfunding are out there and they can be answered. It's just if people want to take that step and actually look them up.
Yeah, I mean, the logistics side of everything, it's not very sexy, you know. It's not, no. And so I could understand why a lot of people, they put that off, they don't like it. But at the end of the day, especially in the long run, you need to master the logistics, and if you don't, you are going to burn a lot of bridges with customers and potential customers.
Yeah, when we had that video a few weeks ago about professionalism, one of the things we talked about was that you have to consider your fulfillment and the logistics of your fulfillment before you even launch your campaign. You already have to have that figured out. You can't go into a campaign thinking like, oh, I'll figure it out when the campaign's over. That's suicide. That's one of the dumbest things you can do. And like you said, Doug, you know, a lot of people who are launching these campaigns are writers and artists and the creative spirits behind the projects. No one's really a straight up businessman or, you know, someone who handles logistics and fulfillment. So they don't consider these things, or they don't have the knack for them the way they do the creative end of things. But you have to figure it out before you get started, or you're going to end up with a huge mess when your campaign's over.
And yeah, there's something else in tangent to that before Doug reacts to it. Whenever you do take a risk with your campaign, it becomes imperative on you, the campaign runner, to eat that cost. For example, at some point, I know he's going to address it, but Doug Ernst he did some very experimental things in terms of advertising. And when we were talking about the budget and stuff, he was like, no, don't worry about it. That's something that I'm going to experiment with. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, that's something that I'm willing to take the risk on. And I made sure to do the same thing too. When we did Black Ops, there were a certain number of artists that I employed because I wanted to get some extra art in the book. And I did not take that cost out of Mark's paycheck or from Matt's paycheck, because I was like, I'm paying for it. It's something that I want to see if it will attract new backers. And so I thought that was really cool that Doug had thought of that idea independent of me. I just thought that as a creator and as kind of a project head, that shows good leadership and good initiative on his part.
Well, yeah. So circling back on Mark's point, with the logistics, if you're not a numbers cruncher type of guy, if you're not a data head, then one of the other things is you have to be able to delegate to people. You can't take too much on, bite off more than you could chew, and then bad things happen. So I knew that Tim had experience with the printing and distribution. I knew that Brett had experience. So in many ways, it was me turning to them and saying, I don't know this stuff. I can learn it, but it would be in many ways inefficient for me to spend so much time trying. It's like, I need to just trust in you. And so it's like, I will pay for whatever the cost is to do it right the first time. Just tell me. And so having that trust, getting a team of guys that you could just totally explicitly just trust is very important as well.
Yeah, and I thank you for putting that trust in me. Of all the people that you had your pick of, I guess at some point we could talk about like why me specifically. I can honestly say that, I mean, part of it might be because I had a vested interest in what you had to offer. I'd been watching your videos for about a year and just thought, hey, this is a guy who's on my wavelength. I think we can talk, and then eventually we became friends. But you didn't have to you didn't have to go with me. There are a lot of people who you can work with who are not necessarily your friends or on a personal basis that could have perhaps accomplished the same task. So it was monumental for me to deliver as well. I mean, even though there were some points where there was a lot of stubbornness on my part and some headaches, you kind of sat through it and you dealt with it. And that's something to always be appreciative of, because now we get to kind of sit back and see, holy cow, it's a miracle that, I mean, any comic book is actually created from beginning to end. You actually get to see how the sausage is made. And it's actually pretty cool. Fresher Luke has a comment for you. He says, Doug Ernst, I have a question. What are your thoughts on creators with successful campaigns who overpromise on rewards and undercut their profits as a result? Are they giving away too much to attract backers?
I think with any sort of campaign, you would take it on a case-by-case basis. So we've talked about this before. Our goals for Soul Finder, or your goals for the Black Ops books, or any of your IPs, in many ways, are very different from a lot of the other creators. So some people, their goal is to make as much money as possible. With us, in many ways, it's really just about getting out great stories and great art in a timely manner and sort of raising the bar in terms of professionalism and those sorts of things. And so at least for Soul Finder, I did not care, like you said, in terms of taking risks with advertising. I was advertising on Christian websites, and I didn't know whether it was going to work or not work at all. I got a nice amount of priests and deacons and some religious people who did back the books, but overall, that was an experiment. We'll just say a lot of money. I don't want to say went to waste, because it ultimately went to a good cause, but I didn't get the return on my investment that I was hoping for. But again, that was something that I was willing to risk. And I was like, if it doesn't work out, that's fine. But if it does, I could actually, whether it worked out or not, I could pass that information on to you. I could pass it on to Mark. I could pass it on to any of the other artists who come to me and ask me questions. And that will make things better for everybody in the long run, because I'm sharing information.
What about, I want to get the opinion of the two writers here, because from the artist side, I think the most important thing is, because I'm given the script by you guys, my goal whenever I'm doing one of these projects is I want the art to be 95% finished. So it's imperative for me to have a schedule and to have a deadline, which means that in the case of Soul Finder, it was a 2-month-long book. In the case of Black Ops, since I was doing half the art, it was approximately 1 month. But I paced myself and I knew this is the target deadline. I need to make it by this date. For Soul Finder, I was off by 1 week. So from the Friday it launched to the next Friday is how long it took me to finish it. But I don't really inquire too much in terms of the writer's side. What are some of the things that y'all have to deal with in terms of personal deadlines or personal stakes that you have in contending with these types of campaigns and projects?
Mark?
Oh, okay. So like right now, I'm writing the script for Common America, and like you said, a deadline is really important. So I always make sure I get you to give me a deadline, Tim. Like, so when do you want to get started drawing? When do you need the script by? And you always give me a say like, well, a date, like you say, like, oh, could I have it by in a month? You know, usually like we're so far ahead because we're either drawing something or you're working on another campaign that as the writer, I have plenty of lead time. So if you say I need the script in a month, I can have that script ready in a month. I just know exactly how many pages I need to write a day. Like right now doing Common America, I pasted out as, oh, if I write 3 pages a day, then I'll have it done well in advance of the deadline. And so right now I'm on pace to have Common America written by the end of this week. And then it'll be ready for Tim to go over, and we'll make the edits on it, and then Tim can get started drawing. But for me, the logistics of the writing, at least for the scripting stage of things, is just to have the deadline. Doing things like the story Bible, the summary, the page breakdowns, that's all stuff that we do, you know, over quite a long period of time as we develop the IP, as we develop the story and the characters. And I just keep track of all of that as we come up with it during like plotting sessions and brainstorming sessions. I basically just do the human note-taking thing. But for me, I feel like as the writer, I have the easiest part of the job. Not to sell writers short, but for me, all I need is a Word program, and I can get my job done. Where you got to get like Procreate and a whole bunch of weird bull crap to to do all your drawing on, and you have much more that you have to invest into it on the artist end. Whereas all I just need is a Word document and enough time to fill it out.
I'm going to chastise you here for just a bit. You consistently sell yourself short, because I firmly believe that it is the writer has the onus of responsibility on making a good book, because there are countless examples of books that have fantastic art, but the writing is so terrible that it almost doesn't justify picking up the book. You know, in terms of its merit, you find out that art can be very shallow, and so I think it's hard. I mean, I can't do what you guys do. And it was funny because when I was in school, I won awards constantly for essays and technical writing, so I'm a pretty good debater. But when it comes to fiction, I have no clue how any of this works. And I'm going to tell a story real quick about Doug to illustrate this, because I know you've shared this before on one of your streams, Doug, but I love this story. It's so true. So I think because Mark and I kind of have a hive mind, we think very much alike in terms of how we see books. Whenever he has a script that he gives to me, I can kind of see it flow in my head. And one thing that happened with Soul Finder, where there were panels where I just thought to myself in the script, I was like, the script is tight, but because it's so foreign to me from a person who I haven't worked with yet, I don't know how well it's going to translate on the page, especially when it's scripted out. It's kind of like when you're ballroom dancing and you're given a partner and you're not sure like how in sync or how harmonious it's going to be. And it wasn't until I actually started like putting the text on the page and started looking at things in sequence where I was like, holy cow, like it actually reads better than I could have imagined. So it's almost like Doug kind of has an intuitive way of looking at comics where it makes sense in his head, and that I have to trust in him that it will turn out the way that he sees it to be. And I just thought that that was neat. Just when I thought that after working with Chuck and Mark that I kind of have a feel for it, it was kind of a brand new experience, and seeing that where it's kind of like, wait for it, and then there you can see it, and you see it in its totality, and it makes sense, and it reads. That was like a really cool thing. And so I like writers. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like artists too. I am one, but I give so much credit to writers because, in my opinion, y'all are the ones who have to do a lot of the heavy lifting because it's on you for it to work.
Yeah, well, earlier you mentioned, you know, something like putting up with stubbornness or something along those lines. And in my mind, I don't really think about it like that. I thought about it like, okay, it's like you're playing a pickup game of basketball with somebody, you know, for the very first time, and you're on the first. So it's going to take a little while to figure out how that other guy, you know, how it's all going to work together, and how you're going to, or like a concert or whatever, an opera, how you're going to play your instruments and they're going to sound right together or whatever. And so with that, I think that everything worked about as well as you could expect. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, once we kind of figured out, okay, this is how you, like you said, you're very schedule oriented, and I have my way of working, and Brett has his way of working, and we all just have to figure out the best possible scenario to maximize all of our talents. And I think that's why getting a group of guys together who are just mature enough to actually, when they have certain differences, like one of the things that I spoke with you about is like, let's always figure out what the principled compromise is. There's always some principled compromise out there somewhere. As long as we can find that, we will continue to move forward. And I thought that you and Brett did a great job with that.
And it's hard considering that. So you have a day job, and you know, I'm an audiologist, and Brett, little did we know, because he was kind of keeping it under the table, even though we kind of had a hint on it, but he was working on a second campaign simultaneous with it. And that's why one of the things that we mentioned, and for people in the chat who are interested in running their own campaigns, make sure that you do hit up Doug Ernst, because he can give you the skinny in terms of how everything kind of went. It is a miracle that anything ever gets produced. It really is. Even our printing, I'll share this much with you. Who we used as a printer came in at the 12th hour. Like, I had everything locked down. I had 3 quotes. We went with one. I had told Doug, this is who we're going to use as a printer. Oh my gosh, it's like 6-week turnaround time for their shipping. If we're lucky, you can pay them like $2,000 extra and they can get it in 2 weeks. And we just happened to, by serendipity, have a printer who came in and was like, I'm a local printer, and I can do this in under 2 weeks. From the time I start to the time it ships, we can ship it out in 2 days. And that came in, and I was like, Doug, I got to get you on the horn. This just came in. We're going to save ourselves a lot of money, and we're going to get the same quality product that we budgeted ourselves for. But a lot of it was kind of a nail biter, I'm sure, on Doug's end, because this is his first time doing it. When Brett announced that he was doing the Agent Poso book, obviously he had to juggle his priorities, and he did a good job. He got his work in on time. I had a schedule for my lettering, and I had a timetable for getting it into fulfillment so that we could actually have it delivered by November. And I know Doug, he wanted to be early. Maybe the next go around he will be, but he is on time, and that's what's important. You know, here we are mid-November, and he's on time. So there is a lot of that stress involved with it. So, I mean, Mark and I can talk about some of the stress because we've already been through it, but I guess you'd want to share with some people kind of the things that you had to deal with this campaign.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably the biggest thing, especially so with a lot of the other Indiegogo campaigns, as time has gone on, there has been trends, some of them positive, some of them negative. And when a negative trend starts to begin, you don't want to fall into that narrative. And so, and then knowing all the different moving parts that have to come together perfectly to make sure everything gets out to where it needs to be, and customers are asking you about things and all that sort of stuff. It's just, there's a huge weight that starts to build. And like you said, that first customer who gets their book and they're like, hey, I got it. And then luckily they actually liked the book on top of it. It's like they could have got it and it could have been the very, this book stinks or whatever. And I was like, no.
So we've been seeing that a lot today, Doug and Tim. We've been getting all those tweets of people with photographing their unboxings of their Soul Finders and Black Ops 2s. And they're like, look what just came in the mail. Yeah. And I'm like, so settle down. Wait until you've read the book before you say thank you.
Yeah. And so it's like this pressure just builds because you want to deliver in a timely fashion to your customers, and you want them obviously to like the book. I knew that they would like the art. The art was no question. It was just the writing. And then right before I came on, there was a customer that was like, hey, this is better than I thought it was going to be. Do you have any extra for Christmas presents? And like,
oh, wow.
I know he's obviously being nice, but like I started laughing because it was just like, oh, I thought this was going to be some pretty crappy writing, but yes, it's pretty good. Or I don't know. It was just cracking me up a little bit. So it's a relief.
Yeah, it is a relief, obviously. And I just thought that was funny that the very first one that I saw was someone who was like, hey, I got my book in. and it was worth every penny. I finished reading it, and I'm like, thank God, because not that I doubted your writing, but it's one of those things where you never know, because if it's
Right.
people who are part of the team, obviously we like our stuff, otherwise we wouldn't be working on it. But especially someone like you who is kind of new to the independent comic scene writing fiction, that's the news that you want to hear. That it was not in vain, that your script worked, that it wasn't just me and Brett kind of speaking positively about you, that Mark's edits, went into play. Everything kind of coalesced and congealed. And I think that, yeah, I think behind the scenes, or at least in private, whenever we speak to each other, there's this tendency for us to be kind of harsh when it comes to critiquing like other campaigns. And I think that some of it can't be helped because we're three guys who we figured all of this out within a year. We have never put out books before. We have no clue what we're doing. But like you said, there are so many moving parts where it's like you have to know how the parts move, because how in the world can you get this off the ground? Like, it's almost like there's no excuse whenever someone says, "Oh, I'm 15 months late." How? Like, you've worked in the industry for longer than we have. I mean, we're not, we're amateur hour. So I think that obviously there's a part of you that can critique it. You're just too nice. You choose not to. And that's typically how Mark and I are. We can only offer advice in terms of, well, hey, if you want to be on time, you can talk to us and we'll kind of tell you how all of this stuff works.
Right. We're in this bizarre situation where in some, like when you actually put out a book on time and you're kind of, yay, you're throwing your congratulatory, you're like, whoo, thank goodness we got this book out on time. So there are people that actually take that as a slight on other campaigns, and you're just like, it's really not. It's like I'm willing to talk to anybody about what I did on Soul Finder with you and Brett, and we've always been open about saying like we want to help other people. So why are you unfollowing me on Twitter in a huff or whatever because I had a good day today? Like I don't understand it. It's kind of bizarre.
Let's talk about communication. So one thing I like about you and Mark is that I can reach you guys in an instant. So there were a lot of times when Mark and I work on Black Ops, there's a lot of editing, a lot. I mean, Black Ops probably went through 9 revisions. I mean, not the script, but in terms of me sending a page to Bill lettering it, sending it to me. I look at it, I send it to Mark sends it back to me. We rewrite a panel. I mean, the lettering phase was kind of a nightmare on its own. The good thing about dialogue in Soul Finder is you actually mastered something that Mark and I are both guilty of, which is we like exposition. Like, we actually like narrative. And Bill gave us the advice where he said, hey, you guys like it, but the reality is in comics, you got to trim that stuff down because you only have so much space. And the good thing is that in your script, everything is kind of pared down. But I like the fact that I can just call you or call Mark and I can reach you guys within an hour, whether it be by phone, by text message, email, or Twitter. That I know that there's some people out there with teams where they feel like communication it can be a big burden, where it's like, hey, my artist hasn't spoken to me in like a few days. What's up with that? Going forward, when you're looking at kind of advice that you have to give to other people, how important would you think that communication is to it versus like a deadline?
Yeah, that's another one of those things where each team needs to kind of figure out their own personalities and what meshes, what they can deal with. So for me personally, and this might just be because of my background and with the newspaper, and then before that in the nonprofit world, if somebody emails you, if somebody calls you, you don't have the luxury of just being like, I'll get back to you in 2 weeks. Like you cannot do that. You have to get back to people in a timely manner. So for me personally, as a writer, if I had an artist and I sent them a text or an email and they just didn't get back to me for a week or 2 or 3 weeks, I would be going livid. And so, but other people might be able to like work with that, and that's fine. But for me, communication is definitely key because we don't have that bullpen where we can just bounce spitball ideas off one another. So being able to either call or text and say, hey, what do you think about this? And then get a response, and then the information flow, get that going and move on to the next challenge. That's very important.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Mark and I don't have that problem because we like talk all the time. But
Yeah,
I talk
so, I
to
mean, but
Mark
we
about
do
as much
have
as I
the
talk to
thing is we
you.
do have day jobs. So I mean, there's
Right.
times when you've called or texted me with a question, and I'm at work and I can't get to you and for like 3 or 4 hours. And same thing with like when you've been doing your audiology thing, you've got a flashlight in somebody's ear. You can't you can't take my phone call right now. So there are times when we can't get back to each other like ASAP, but usually we get back to each other within that day. There's never a time when we just go, radio silence for 2 or 3 weeks. That doesn't happen, and that's how we edit each other in real time as the story goes along. We don't do a complete rewrite of the script and then a draft 2 and a draft 3 and a draft 4. We tweak things as we go along and perfect them. And I actually find that to be a much less stressful process than having to completely rewrite the script 3 or 4 times. Instead, we just find the parts that aren't working, talk them out, and then make the edits in real time. And
some
I
of
very
that,
much prefer that.
some of that I carried over to Soul Finder, and I again working with Doug, it was like I don't know how he's gonna like this, but there were times where he would have like 6 panels, and maybe like the third panel was like, oh, X person hits Y. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, instead of hitting them, it would be better if they, I don't know, elbowed them. Yeah, it's just an example. And instead of 6 panels, it'd be better if we did it in 5 or do it in 7. So I would just do it and be like, I hope, I don't know if Doug's going to see this or not, but this is how Mark and I work. But every time that we did that, I mean, it wasn't too often that Doug asked me to change things. And that was awesome. I liked it because it meant that he trusted me as kind of an artist, being able to kind of see into the page and interpret it in a way that I thought would work best. There was only one time, and I know he's shared it because I heard it before, and I think it's a really funny story. There was only one time where there was a major revision, and I'll tell everyone what it was. There was a character who looked like Dan Slott in the church, and he was like, did you put Dan Slott in the book? And honestly, I didn't really know what he was talking about, so I was kind of being cheeky, and I was like, maybe. And he was like, no, I'm being serious. Please do not do that. And so I looked through the page I just sent him, and I was like, no, that's my friend Andrew. Like, he just happens to look like Dan Slott.
Oh no,
And Mark's
you just
met him,
offended
right?
Andrew.
Yeah, Mark's met Andrew. He can confirm he looks like Dan Slott. He looks like a Hispanic Dan Slott. And so I was like, no, okay, I know you're serious. I'm gonna go in there and like revise it so he looks more like him.
But on
So
top of everything, he had a bot fly coming out of his forehead in the middle of mass, and I'm just like, if Dan Slott ever sees this, he's gonna be like, Doug Ernst. So,
well, and then
Well,
real quick, I wanted to
go on.
I wanted
Go
to
on.
ask Doug how he liked that, because we're happy to announce, and he's announced it already, Matthew Weldon will be taking over Soul Finder Volume 2 next year. I will still stay on as a letterer, and Mark and I will help with editorial. But Matt will be joining, and Matt does the same thing. He did the same thing with Black Ops 2. He kind of tweaked some of our suggestions. As a writer, how did that kind of make you feel? Did you like it? Were you hesitant, pleasantly surprised? Like, what were you thinking as stuff like that happened?
When it comes to like the panel breakdown and all of that, I looked at it like that old game show where they're like, I can name that tune in 5 notes. I can name it in 4. I can name it in 3. I can name it in 2. Name that tune. And so if I gave you 6 panels and you're like, I could tell this page in 4 panels, then I'd be like, do it or whatever. And then so it's like, you're the artist. So as long as the text is essentially, the dialogue is there and you get across the feeling and the emotion and what I want on the page, visually, you're the man. So if you can do it in 3, if you can do it in 1 panel, but all the dialogue is appropriate and all that, then go for it. I trust you because you're the artist.
Yeah, there's sometimes things that as the writer we kind of forget because we visualize the story in our head as we're scripting. And so the picture is vivid to us, but if we fail to put something descriptive in the actual script to explain how we visualize this in our brains, Tim's not a mind reader. He can't see those pictures in our head that, seem so intuitive to us. And so if he changes something, Usually when Tim like adds a panel or takes away a panel, it's either to make the scene more expedient, or he did a big one in Black Ops 2 where he actually added more panels and made his job more difficult because he thought of a way to add pizzazz to an action sequence. But there are times when if Tim makes a change or any artist makes a change and it does actually have impact on the narrative or whatever like symmetry you're trying to use, you're trying to display, well, it's kind of your fault as the writer for not putting that note in the script saying, hey, you need to draw it this way because this is important for this reason. And like for Black Ops 1, when Tatzelworm reveals himself, I had visualized the scene as being from Tatzelworm. He's the cat snake thing for people who haven't read Black Ops, as being from Tatzelworm's point of view. And he's looking at USAGI, and I had set it out as like 3 panels of Tatzelworm's POV slowly raising up and USAGI tilting his head up higher and higher to look at Tatzelworm. The idea was supposed to be that Tatzelworm was rising on his serpentine tail and gaining height as he did so. I didn't write that part in the script, though. Like, this is why it's this way. So Tim, he got the same effect across, but he drew it as Tatzelworm slithering around and then getting up on like an antenna, and that was how he was getting his height to look down at USAGI. And it was the same effect, but it wasn't how I visualized it because I didn't write that into the script, and that's my bad.
Yeah, there were key parts in Soul Finder where I drew them exactly how Doug, I guess, wanted them to or intended, and the way I decided on that was how vividly he would describe it to be. So, for example, there's a key panel. It's not a spoiler, really, but there's a key panel where Doug was very vivid, and it said, like, in this panel, yeah, you know, he's firing a gun with rage, and there's someone yelling off the panel saying, like, oh, you're going cyclic, soldier, look how hot that barrel is getting. And so because it was so vivid in terms of its description, I was like, there's not much leeway in terms of depicting this. Like, he has a very definite image in his mind, and that is not something that's up to my interpretation. That is how it's supposed to be, and so that's how I choose. But I've heard stories of writers who are, I think Alan Moore is like this. He's very, very, very particular, and he wants it to be drawn a certain way. So I don't want to say that there's no collaboration, but it's the idea that the artistic vision has to be exactly how the writer envisions it. And so that was a good, you know, between Doug and you, and to some extent Chuck. I was happy that some of that trust was put into the artist as well.
The page I was just showing, this was actually, I mentioned this before, this page, like, I actually got weirdly emotional when I first saw it, because it was like you reached into my mind or something in the middle of the night and then pulled out exactly what I envisioned in my head. And it was so, and then I was just like, I mean, I always was very comfortable with you as the artist, but when I saw that page and it was perfect to me, I was like, wow, this is like, I know Tim was the right choice for this because it's exactly how I imagined it in my head, and you actually like did it. And so that was really cool. And if that happens on a book, to me, I think that's pretty special.
Well, one thing I want to ask Tim as the artist, and what your perspective on this is, because it sounds like, just from my POV, it would be very difficult and frustrating, Tim, is, so you've worked with several different writers. You worked with Chuck Dixon, you've worked with me, you've worked with Doug, and I've had the benefit of seeing all of our scripts. So I did the minor dialogue punch up on Space Force, which was Chuck Dixon's script. Obviously, I've seen my own scripts because I write them, and I got to see Doug's script when he for just the minor first round edits on it. And as people may or may not know, there is no academic format for comic book scripts. It's a free for all. So there are lots of, everybody writes and formats a comic book script differently. And I've seen Chuck's scripts and they aren't formatted like mine. And I've seen Doug's script and they aren't formatted like mine. So Tim, how do you basically learn to ride a bicycle all over again every single time you work with a new writer who has a different formatting style for their scripts?
It's funny because the first thing I do is I don't read it like a comic book script. I read it like prose. and I try to envision it in my head. And so I wanted to mention this in tangent with the thing that Doug was describing. So he might have gotten goosebumps because it was like, oh my gosh, he just reached in my brain and he pulled it out and put it on page. It's the complete opposite. You already reached into your own brain and you put it on a script, and I saw it, and because it was so vivid, it was like, okay, like that. I can honestly remember when I drew that page, I didn't have to think about it. I was like, this is how this page looks. Like I can already see it in my head. Because, and that's kind of the weird thing. It's like the transitive property of comics. The writer takes something out of his head, puts it onto a page, and then I reach into the page, take it, and put it into my head, and then I have to put that onto a page. And so the more vivid that that scene is, the easier it translates and the easier it will flow. So that's the first thing I do. The next thing I do is that I take each page, page by page. I don't even look at the panels, but I look at the overall action and I ask myself, can this fit into the page? Yes or no? If it's a no, then I'll go to, you or to Doug and I'll say, hey, this is, not going to work out quite the way you think it is. Let's either move or subtract. And there were actually a couple pages in Soul Finder where that occurred, where there was like dialogue taking place on one page. And I just thought to myself, like, actually, if you look at the two pages side by side, it would be better to take some of that dialogue and just transition it over to the next page. It's not going to affect anything in terms of the narrative because there's not like a surprise or anything happening there. And so that's typically how it is. It's not so much learning how to ride a bike, but it's definitely like two different buffets where it's like a seafood buffet versus like a Mexican buffet. Like I said, I was very shocked with Doug's script because looking at it, it was like, this is almost like classic comic book storytelling where it's not like expository heavy or narrative heavy. In fact, I think there's only 4 narration boxes and they were put there by me because it was like, I was like, I have to put the population of the city. I have to put something in there like telling us where it is. And again, Bill Williams, this is where having a person who's a good editor comes in. He was like, guys, you got to watch it. I know you guys are like boutique-y kind of people. You have this kind of niche thing that you like and a way of telling your story. But the reality is that mainstream comics and classic comics don't tell a story this way. And I think that's the irony about it, is that Mark and I have had this way of doing things for so long that having Doug come in and do something like the classic way was so foreign to me. And that's why I couldn't see the forest for the trees until the whole thing was like being lettered. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually reading like a lot better than, I thought it could.
Oh, we're waiting for someone to talk.
Yeah,
well, I saw this thing where Fing Book says super soaker of holy water and spray those demons. That actually happens in the horror movie Night of the Demons too.
No, it was Night of the Demons too. I was thinking Tales of the Crypt Bordello of Blood did that as well. The only Dennis Miller horror movie that exists.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting, someone asked me to describe Soul Finder Demons match in private today, and they said, is it a horror? Is it supernatural? Is it religious? Is it, like a superhero? I was like, I honestly don't know how to describe it because you kind of have a smorgasbord of different things. I would say it is superhero, but because Brett Smith put such vivid colors on it, if you look through it, like if you just pick it up in the store and ignore the Dorman covers, which are like very atmospheric, just looking at the pages, you would think it was like a classic comic. Like that's the kind of beauty of it, where you have this kind of synergistic thing that we've all done and put together to create the final product. And I guess it was very different than I think how any of us could have expected. Well, with the exception of Doug, it might actually be how Doug really saw it in his mind. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it was one of those things where I knew your style and I knew what you were capable of, and I knew what Brett was capable of. And so in many ways, this is like, yeah, basically what I envisioned, but even better than I had envisioned, because that was one of the other things, as we talked about early on, is I wanted to be with smart guys who could take whatever I did, and then when they were like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Mark puts in his 2 cents here, and Mike McNulty and Professor Geek, and smart people will elevate my own work. They'll make it actually better than it would be otherwise. And so you and Brett just made it actually even better than I thought it could be originally.
Well, Brett definitely made my art better than it could be. There were key pages where, holy cow, I mean, they would have not turned out the way they did if Brett didn't come in. And that's why I know that he likes to be called a color artist and not a colorist. And the distinction is that typically a color artist is not just coloring, but they're also like the visual effects guy, the post-production guy who comes in and throws in like the effects. And this is like an effects heavy book. There's fire, there's depictions of like ethereal dimensions and stuff. Things where I was like, hey Brett, you're gonna have to come in and take over here. And I didn't want him to have this dilemma. I know he's had it on another book. He was actually telling me about it, where he was like, there was a whole panel where they didn't even draw anything, and they were like, "You're the boss. You go in and create this like weird dimension." And he was like, "Gosh darn it, I don't want to do that. That's your job. You need to do that." So I tried to save him as much work as possible. But there are just some places where I wish I could show people the comparison, and I think I will when it's all said and done. Comparison between the black and white art versus how he came in and threw in the effects, because they're like night and day. They would not look the same otherwise.
Well, it's weird because there's one particular scene towards the very end, and I think you know what I'm talking about, where I knew exactly what you wanted to do, and I think if Brett would have colored it how I thought you envisioned it, it would have still been very, very powerful. But then he had like a totally different take on it, and he did that, like you were saying, this sort of otherworldly sort of, I don't want to say psychedelic or whatever, but like his take on it was like very, very cool as well. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, two really smart guys, they both have a different angle on it. Just trust them to do the angle. And for me, it still ultimately gets the point I wanted across. So it's like win-win situation. Whether it was Brett's angle or Tim's, I win. So
yeah, and that's what's important, because it's your book, it's your writing, it's your story. We essentially serve to fulfill that, and hopefully we achieved our goal. I wanted to ask you real quick a question about the process of doing the crowdfunding. So one thing that we have not addressed yet is, because a lot of people were wondering about speed. The illusion of speed comes because I have the work done 95% before we launch anything. When Trump Space Force launched, it was 90% complete. Wall Might was 100% complete, and Black Ops was 95% complete. The only thing is that I have the luxury of doing that because I typically will take the hit, and I've been using the funds from previous campaigns to basically pay for like my month or 2 months of work. And there's a lot of artists out there, I understand, who can't do that. In a position where they're not afforded that, how would a creator like you approach that? Let's say there was an artist that you wanted, like Matt Weldon, and they can't take the time off to actually devote to it. They need to they can't devote their time to being like 95% complete. What are some things that you can think of logistically to kind of help that? Because there's some people out there who might be like, well, I really want to have all of this nailed down, but I can't get a guy like Tim to work on my book. How would you approach those situations?
Oh, geez. I'm basically blanking on this right now. So can I like lean on Mark as a crutch to go, and then like my brain will come up with some sort of answer as Mark is answering here. So
I think Mark.
I never really thought about it.
I think Mark might be taken aback too. So I'll give my answer to the question, and I'll let Mark go, and I'll let you go. The advice I give people is save up enough money for 7 pages of work. Pay an artist to do 7 pages so that they can preview your campaign. Follow up by making sure that your campaign will not deliver in 3 months. Make sure that you ask the artist, how much time would you need to finish this many pages? That is the time limit you give yourself. So if you start your campaign in January, and if it finishes in March, and the artist tells you that they need 3 months to finish it, make sure that you do not guarantee a delivery until like July or August, because then you need to pay the artist, and the artist needs the time to work on it. that is my solution. Some people, that's tough for them because saving up the money to afford even 5 to 7 pages of art, it's a lot.
Right.
But I mean, I think that's the most time and money effective way of doing it. But I want to get Mark's opinion because he's worked with
Well,
he,
no, I'm the worst.
he's a numbers cruncher, you know.
No, I'm the worst person to ask that question to. I've never had to actually go out and find an artist on my own. I've been extremely fortunate in my position because I've worked. Tim and I have collaborated on projects going back more than 10 years, and we've only just now started doing full comics. But obviously, I work with Tim the most because we've known each other so long and we've done so many projects together. Tim is the one who went out and found Matt Weldon. I didn't have to do that. And I'm working with another writer, Eric Taylor. He's the one who is as Matt Weldon calls him, he's the president of Invasion Media, but he's basically our agent who finds all these conventions for Tim and I to go to. And I'm working with him, doing some edits on his book that he's the main scripter on, and he's already gone out and found the artist for that himself. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm extremely.
I don't feel as
lucky.
bad anymore now that I was just like,
maybe you two can tag team it. Let's look at it from a critical angle. Like you have someone who wants to run a campaign and they're ready to go, and they're like, okay, now the only thing I need to do is find an artist and afford it. The only problem is that I can't pay them for this amount of work. I can crowdfund the amount that I'm going to pay them, but there's no way that I can have them pre-prep things to where it's like 90 to 95% complete.
Well, in that case,
what would the practical solution be?
Well, the answer you gave is probably the most practical. Is you can't obviously if you don't have enough money, you can't pay the artist to do the full 40 pages or whatever however long you want your book all at once. But you can reasonably save up 7 pages, and that's when you negotiate with the artist. Like, can I commission 7 pages of work from you? And then I'll launch the campaign. If the campaign is successful, you'll get, and then you negotiate whatever their cut is, for like the remaining 32 pages, 33 pages, or maybe they might want a cut of the campaign, whatever that is. But usually if you can pay them to do 7 pages and then you've launched the campaign is successful, now you've got money. Now you can pay the artist for the remaining pages that you need, and that solves that problem. If the campaign isn't successful and you already did 7 pages, well, then you're not really out anything. You've got 7 pages for of work done. You don't owe the artist any more money, so you've already spent your money and you don't have to spend any more. It's depressing if your campaign did not succeed. I can understand that. But yeah, I think that's the best course of action.
Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of weird for me because for me personally, I would not want to ever be in such a situation to begin with. So like I met you and you and I started talking off the grid about our faith and politics, and that's how we got to know each other. And then we basically had this sort of same vision about what I wanted to accomplish with Soul Finder, and we had a very similar mentality in terms of creating these books in our spare time to begin with. And so on so many levels, we were on the same wavelength. And when it comes to like the monetary reward or whatever, we were on the same page in terms of what we didn't really care about the money as much. And so for me, I just want to find guys that they just believe in the overall vision. And if you find trustworthy guys, then you know that in the end, it's going to turn out all right. So like you, I didn't even, I paid Brett basically ahead of time, but I don't think you would mind me saying that. But for you, I didn't even pay you until after the Indiegogo campaign. And so you had trust. It's not like you were demanding up front that I pay you X amount of money. It was just like we had this relationship where we knew that the other guy's not going to screw you over. He's going to give you the money one way or the other. I'm going to get it to you. I'm not lying to you. I'm telling the truth. And so forming those sorts of friendships and relationships is really important.
Well, I think you kind of answered that question in terms of addressing Brett, because now Brett, he's kind of the odd man out because this is his profession, this is his vocation. But you saved up the resources monetarily so that you could afford him. So
Right.
that did take time. I mean, I don't know how much he got paid, but I know that to get paid up front for the work and to be guaranteed a delivery date, I mean, that is faith that you had to place in him. And obviously, it was also faith that you got through vetting him, asking me, asking other people in terms of his professionalism and his speed, that you could trust in him. And he even said, he was like, I could get it to you maybe a month early if we're lucky, but I can definitely get it to you on time so that we can make this date. And he did it. I mean, obviously, we're sitting here right now because he was able to accomplish it, but that meant that you had to save up for him. So I think in the end, really, it seems like the piece of advice that we have to give is when you hire an artist, you have to price it, and
Right.
you have to budget it. And that, I think, takes me to my next question. So, in terms of ranking your priorities for crowdfunding, I would say that number one is budget, 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 budget. I was keeping up with a campaign today, and I saw an update where they were like, "Oh, we're really happy because our book is almost done. Now the only problem is we need more money for the shipping. So make sure that here's like a GoFundMe, a PayPal, and I think a Venmo. Send us some money so that we can cover shipping. We really appreciate it." And I just thought to myself, like, "Oh man, that's like a problem I'm never gonna have
Right.
because I factor that into the budget. Like,
Right.
I don't understand. Don't get me wrong. I understand how that can be a problem. People either get over eager, they feel like it's factored into their price that they want to charge people, whatever. But I mean, I have like a pretty detailed spreadsheet in terms of that. Now, other people, maybe like Mark, might think, well, budget is fine. I would rather prefer communication. For you personally, Doug, what would you consider to be like a top priority or top priorities when it comes to crowdfunding your book, either from what things that you learned from Soulfinder or going forward?
I think humility is a virtue that you need to have because that will allow you to see and admit where you are going to fall short if you try and take on something yourself. So like we were saying earlier with the printing and distribution, I would fall if I tried to take that on myself. Soulfinder would not be out on time. There's no way it would be, or I would. Other aspects of my life would severely suffer as I try to make that happen. So it was, I need to be able to say, okay, I could do this. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm bad at. This is what I'm weak at. Oh, I need to find a team member who is really schedule oriented. And oh, wow, Tim, he's a perfect guy for that. I need to find somebody who is a hard charger, who's just like, okay, Brett is a hard charger. He's a pit bull. So I got the pit bull, I got the number cruncher guy, and Tim, he's schedule oriented. And then I have this sort of overall vision, and I've been trying to. So humility is really important. Budgeting, like you said, if you can't do it right the first time, like you probably don't want to do it, and you don't want to be counting on the goodwill of other people. And oh well, they'll understand if I'm like 6 months late because I didn't budget for printing. And it was like, you don't want to be in that position. I never want to be in the position to say, please, I'm sorry, give me another X number of months. I don't want to be there at all. I want them to be saying, like they did with Black Ops today, holy cow, I got this early. This is amazing. I feel like I just ordered this yesterday. That's where you want to be.
Yeah, and I part of me thinks that the whole budgeting thing is like second nature, but the reason I doubt it, and I like the fact that you brought up humility because that ties into a lot of factors. But for example, I like being on time. I don't like being late. But I see people all the time on social media where it's like, hey, I'm mad because this creator is a month late or 2 months late or 5 months late or whatever it might be. But you see people all the time who are like, man, I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. I paid money. I know they'll deliver sometime. Well, would you be happy if they were 2 years late? Oh yeah, no problem. If you're the creator and you see that, then you might not prioritize scheduling. That might not have anything to do with you because you're like, hey, people forgive me for being late all the time. Why should I care? So I think this idea of budget, even though it's like something that means a lot to me, it might not mean a lot to other people. Now, Mark, you've worked with me on some campaigns. You've worked on some of your own individually, and you self-published. So you probably have probably broader experience just in terms of personal dealings. What's something that you prioritize in terms of, I guess, working as a team or working on a project?
Well, I know that everybody has a place in this assembly line of making comics. You know, whether you're the writer, the artist, or if you're a separate person who does fulfillment. When it's your turn to do your job, the next person can't run their leg of the relay until you do your job, until you make it around the track. And everyone's counting on you. So you have to take that responsibility very seriously. When it's my turn to write the script, I just had the baton passed to me, and now I got to run. So I do. And that's when I get the deadline from you, like, Mark, can you have the script in a month? And I'm like, absolutely. And I'll make sure I have it done in a month. And if I have to stay up late or sacrifice a weekend or whatever, you know, to make sure I get it done on time, I get it done on time because everyone's counting on me. And I think one of the most disappointing things you can feel is letting other people down. Mm-hmm. When you tell someone that you can do something, that you will do something, and then you flake on it and you don't get it done, and you have to confess, like, I'm sorry, I could not. And even if the other person is understanding, you know, you still feel bad, or at least you should feel bad that you promised you would do something for someone and then you didn't do it and you let them down. And you only want to feel that way once. You don't want to make a habit of it. So I try to never be in that position where I don't run my leg of the relay, you know, in the time I said I'd do it. I always want to make sure that once I pass the baton, you know, it's the other person's job now, and it's their time to run their leg.
Well, not just that, but the relay goes the other way too. You don't want to disappoint anyone, but I think you also don't want to be disappointed. You hand the baton off to someone, and if that person doesn't even make it like 5 meters and they stumble and fall holding the baton, I mean, that reflects on you, right? Because you're like, I did my job. And
exactly. And that's the thing, though, is that you can't be – you sacrifice your ability to complain about the dude that just face planted and broke his teeth. Because if you're like, well, you know, if you say like, oh, so-and-so didn't do their job, oh, shame on them, you know, and then they can turn around and say, well, Mark, you know, you were so late with your script, or you didn't do it at all, you let us all down, and then all of a sudden you sacrificed your high ground to be critical of someone else. And while you shouldn't be overly critical of someone, you should try to be forgiving, you also have to understand that, well, if you're the one who's not doing your job, you really can't get mad at other people when they don't do their job, you know.
And that's something else what we're going to talk about here in terms of the quality, because I want to elucidate for people what Doug did with this campaign, that it's kind of set a bar for us and it set a bar for him too. He wanted the best quality book affordable, and that's one of the reasons why there is something very interesting with Black Ops and Soul Finder. They are the exact same quality book. We use the same printer. They went to print within days of each other with the same specs. Soul Finder is printed on 105-pound paper. There is no fluting on the paper. There is no heat or humidity damage. I know people say that 60-pound paper or less is industry standard. Doug did not want industry standard. He wanted something that was durable and reliable. He wanted it square bound because he saw what we did on the Black Ops Volume 1. And so because I showed him at Bell County Comic Con kind of what to expect, he wanted that, but he plussed it by having a resilient book. And because he wanted it, guess what? We wanted it too. So for Black Ops 2, we did the same thing. We said, well, let's just match it pound for pound, 105-pound paper. Let's just go all the way. He beat us, though, in terms of the gold foil. That was something really cool. It was a nice touch that he put in the Soul Finder book. And the other thing that he did, too, was, and I can reveal this now because people have their books, I want to thank Antarctic Press for doing our fulfillment. They are in the middle of the fulfillment right now. They've already mailed out 420 books. The rest of them will be mailed out after Thanksgiving. But he went the extra mile of sending Gemini mailers to ensure that we don't have the problem of damaged books. Now, sometimes you can't help it because you have like basically, I don't know, bulls in the china shop when it comes to post offices and your delivery man. They just might have a bad day and they'll try to bend a phone book in half if they have that rage in them. So sometimes you can't help a damaged product. But that was something that, again, not many first time campaigners think about. But he had the kind of forethought to be like, no, I'm going to pay the money. Let's get some Gemini mailers sent over. Mark and I, because we're using Iconic Comics and Bell County Comic Con as their fulfillment, they had their own method of doing it. They were able to buy rigid box mailers. So I think what we're going to have to do is see, after everything is said and done, I'm pretty sure there's going to be, a few damages. You just can't help it. But we want to see kind of if they stood that resiliency test and set that standard for ourselves moving forward. So there are some interesting things that we're thinking about doing. Now, this is a question I haven't asked Doug yet, but I don't know if I'm going to catch him off guard. But what are some new things that you want to implement going forward with Soulfinder 2? Because I'm sure you've had some time to think in terms of things that went with this campaign, ideas that have sprung up in terms of things that you might want to do or try for the next one. Can you give our listeners an idea of things that you want to try out?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I want to duplicate all the things that have been going pretty well. Like you said, whether it's the Gemini mailers, getting out on time or early, doing all that sort of stuff, having the quality of the book itself, the paper stock and all of that. I want that to meet or exceed current standards. But when it comes to certain things like international shipping, that's something that I'm going to have to, that's a tough nut to crack, because right now I'll be mailing all of those out myself, and I'm going to be eating the difference in terms of the shipping costs. And so that has been, that's a weakness for me, is the international element. So that I need to work on. I want to make sure that people have the first Soulfinder Demons match when the next one comes out with Matt Weldon, so they could get up to speed. So I'll probably mess around with tiers and pricing, but also I want to keep lowering the price point as much as possible for people. So it's really just going to be messing around with the price point, and I guess maybe adding a couple perks, but not getting too out of hand. One of the things that you were really you had foresight on is, I was like, Tim, I want to get with like a sculptor or something like that. It was like Father Redder and Reginald Crane, and I want this King Cobra, and I don't care if I got to make like 3 of them, but I want to get them. And it's like, Doug, let's scale it down a little bit, buddy, and let's just get this book out. And so you helped strip down the campaign to make sure that I could get out on time. But so I would like to incrementally just maybe offer a couple more tiers that people would like, and then I'll know more once I start getting feedback in the near future.
Yeah, because you'll get that feedback eventually. People will, they might hear you talk about it, or they might read the book and they'll be like, hey, Doug, when are you going to make Soulfinder action figures? And then that's your next step, right? It's like, okay, like this needs to happen. I mean, the entire reason why we have plush toys is because after Black Ops 1, it was like, you guys need to make plush toys out of this. And I had experience making plushies, both on Thump and working with plush toy companies like Squishable. So I was like, okay, I have the resources. I know how much this costs in general. It's something we can do moving forward. But I mean, like, we're playing with it all the time in terms of Mark and I. I mean, he and I just had to talk about this, but we're going to try it in 2020 and see if it works. We have not offered digital, but we're going to offer a $5 digital tier. And another thing that we're playing around with is having no book price higher than $10 and then $15 for shipping. So $5 added to that. And we might be shooting ourselves in the foot, but it's kind of like, hey, maybe if we lower our price, maybe we'll get more backers. And the more people we have reading our stuff is good, because it means that there's more eyes on it. There's more people maybe talking about it, but it's all kind of experimental. So some people might be like, oh, these guys, they have it figured out. Like, no, we don't.
Well,
We
exactly.
have no clue.
The key word is experimental. If anybody out there plans on doing campaigns as like a regular thing, like you want to do once a year or twice a year, is that you, no matter how much you study and how many tips you get, you're going to have to go through a learning curve where you try different things and you see what works for you. It's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. I mean, Tim and I have been doing comic book conventions since at least 2013, 2014. And we're still tweaking and experimenting with the kinds of products that we bring, the kind of like art that we have on prints, or maybe the art sells better as those acrylic standees. Our setup and breakdown system, we've been tweaking like that for years, figuring out the most expedient way, but also the best way to display the various products we bring to the conventions. And we're always learning and trying new things with that. And it's the same thing with Indiegogo campaigns or Kickstarter campaigns, however you want it. You're going to have to tweak it along the way, and you're always going to be tweaking it, and you're always going to be trying different combinations, different price points, and different things. So just don't be afraid to experiment. And if something doesn't work, then you just don't do it again. You know, that's how you learn, and you don't learn unless you try.
So this is for Doug Ernst. You have your own. Okay, so now you have your merchandising idea. Thing Books says, I want a cross, but it's like one of those retractable bow staffs. So you hold up the cross, and if the demon doesn't back off, the little bugger gets it. Yes and no. I think that'd be cool. I think one of the ideas that we had thrown back and forth was the idea of maybe getting like custom rosaries. I think that would be really neat, but that's not my field of expertise. I think Doug actually knows more about cool rosaries than I do. I've had one rosary for the last decade, actually 2 decades, and it's from the Knights of Columbus, and I like it because it's a black and silver rosary that I hang from my rearview mirror, and that way I can conveniently take it with me when I go to church or whatever. But Doug has been showing me like all these really cool like rugged rosaries and stuff. So I'm like,
this is the World War I battle beads one. They actually used to give them to soldiers during World War I. They were issued to them, and so I think you actually put it in the rosary that Father Reginald Crane has at one point. I think is basically this rosary or very similar to it. So. Yeah, and that's another one of those things where with this particular property, you're always, how do I say it? It's like, I'm not shying away from my faith at all, but you don't want to beat people over the head with it, or you don't want it to turn into suddenly like, I'm trying to force you to believe exactly what I believe. You're trying to be subtle about certain things here and there. So I don't know how it'll go with merchandise in the future. But like I said, I'm sure people will, the customers will let me know. They'll get back to me and say what they like or what they want, and whether it's G.I. Joe type figures, but for Soul Finder or I don't know, or a sculptor or something like that. We'll see.
I thought of a really cool one. I just found one. So Mark and I, we went on vacation, and it's like my prized souvenir. But we went. I can't say this without laughing. We went swimming with manatees, and my prized souvenir is all the photos that were taken. They put them on a manatee USB stick, and I actually wanted to make copies of it to give to like the people that went with us. So I went searching for the manatee USB stick, and I found something. It was custom made. So it was a custom-made manatee USB stick, and I found one that was kind of cool because it was like a USB stick for like priests and clergy. So I think it was like shaped like a cross, so you could actually use it as a cross and like use it as a data stick too. And I was like, holy cow, this is cool! Like this is such a neat idea. I don't know. Mark and I worked in merchandising, so I can't help it. There's times when I come across as like a shill or a consumer. An overzealous consumer, but it's just kind of my upbringing that it's not something I can help. Jeremy Peerboom in the chat says, Mark and Tim and Doug deliver another solid product, but I missed out on Soul Finder. How can I obtain a copy? Well, you're in the right place, because all you have to do is email Douglas Ernst or just get in contact with him on Twitter, and I think he still has a few spare copies that he can arrange for you. If not, after Antarctic Press is finished with fulfillment, they're going to ship whatever is remaining to Doug so that he can actually have some to bring to conventions and to sell on his own. And I think that'll be kind of exciting. We already kind of have it arranged with Doug that, I think with this book, he's officially like a comic book creator, which means that if he does do conventions in the future, he can, because he actually has published work under his belt now. So I'm sure that he'll be hanging with us at some point in the near future at conventions, which would be kind of cool. Oh yeah, there he is. He already said, Doug, I see that you responded in the chat. That's me.
Yes.
You know, there's something interesting. You said that you don't want to be overzealous with your book, but here's how I see it. I think like the best way to describe it is this. If you look at Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, both of them touch on Judaism and Christianity respectively, but they're not zealous, but they treat the source material with reverence, right? Like in the Last Crusade, they're after the cup of Christ, but there's nothing that proselytizes to the viewer that they have to believe this, but it fit with the reverence that the characters in it do believe it, and it's alluded to several times, especially in the Last Crusade. Lots of messages about faith, and it's ironic that I don't think Steven Spielberg is Christian per se, but as the director of the film, he takes that in-universe approach where it's like, hey, I might not believe this, but the reality is that the characters in this book in this story have to act like this is legit, and I think that's how you're approaching Soulfinder Demons Match as well.
Yeah, and then the next one, I don't even think I've talked to you about this, but the next one involves the Eucharist, and so that's going to be one where there's essentially the cult of Blackfire. People that got Soulfinder will know about it. They are after a specific. Well, I won't get into it, but it'll involve the Eucharist, so I have to be talking about that and what exactly the Eucharist is and its properties and how it will affect these characters. There's sort of like a I don't want to say a mystery, but there's the cult is trying to capture this particular Eucharist, and so that'll be a challenge in terms of doing it in a way where it's, like you said, like an Indiana Jones type understanding or treatment of what I'm talking about.
And it's interesting because The Last Crusade is essentially dealing with topics of the Eucharist, because, for example, there's that part at the end where a lot of people think it's just a part of the movie where it's like, oh, you can't drink of the cup unworthy or else you'll die. That's actually an allusion to the Eucharist, where it's like, if you are in sin on Sunday and you go get the host, you're actually committing a mortal sin because you're not supposed to do that. So that element is actually worked in there in a way that I think that the movie-going audience can understand. But if you're like a Catholic and you see it, then you know, oh, I can see kind of the allegory. Well, not even an allegory. It's actually more direct because it is the Grail. It is something that is, at least in that world, pretty synonymous with Christ. So kudos to you. That's a hard topic to tackle. Mark and I just have to worry about killer rabbits with like grenades and stuff. All
right, I think I'm gonna have to wind down. I got work tomorrow.
Okay, well, we're gonna wind down anyway because we're already at an hour and 17 minutes, and I know that at some point Doug will want to do his own celebratory stream on his own channel. But in conclusion, we're happy. Let's give a really quick update. I want to have a real quick shout out to the Needle Mover Society. They were the ones who actually got us over our initial hump of $8,000, and that's, we couldn't have done it without them. Couldn't have gotten these books out. I want to thank Johnny Wong and Kristen Whetstone with Bell County Comic Con and Iconic Comics for doing our fulfillment. I want to thank Antarctic Press for doing the fulfillment that's still ongoing for Soulfinder Demons Match. And Doug, I didn't know if there was anyone that you particularly wanted to pay kudos to in this stream.
Yeah, for Soulfinder Demons Match, obviously you, Mark, Brett, Matt Weldon, Professor Geek, Mike McNulty, my wife, and all of the people that took a chance, all of the backers, everyone who supported the book, because I'm a first-time comic book writer, and some people were on the fence and are like, I don't know about this guy. I don't know if it's going to be how the writing's going to be, but they took a chance. And so anybody that supported the book, even if it was just tweeting it out, the link, you didn't have enough money for the book at the time, that was huge. So I appreciate anyone who helps support the book in any way at all. So thank you. Absolutely.
And Mark and I do not look at our backer lists at all for any of our campaigns, not unless you contact me directly and say, hey, there's an issue. That's the only time I go in and actually look at them. So we are as shocked as anyone whenever you tweet out something that says, oh, hey, Tim, hey, Mark, I got this book. Thank you. Like, there's a reason why we thank you all individually, because we don't know who the backers are. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One is security, because I don't ever want to be accused of revealing the information. It's not mine to reveal, so I take that very seriously. And two, we don't want to guilt anyone into supporting us who can't support us monetarily. If, like Doug said, if you're retweeting, if you're helping us spread the word and getting people to back it, that's all we want. That's all that we could ask for. So I don't ever want to put anyone into position of having to back us when in reality they might be embarrassed, or it might not be something they're interested in. So we're very happy with what we've been seeing so far, and we're going to be happy in the next few weeks as people start getting their books, both for Black Ops 2 and for Soul Finder. So be sure to follow Doug on his channel. The link is in the description below. Make sure to check out Soul Finder Demons Match. If you're interested in a copy, you can contact him on Twitter or email him. But other than that, I want to thank Doug for appearing on our stream. For everyone else, have a good day. We'll probably be streaming again sometime tomorrow. And if we don't hear from you until next week, have a happy Thanksgiving. So
Happy Thanksgiving.
See ya. Happy Thanksgiving.